Welcome to the Little By podcast, Julia.
Wow, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
So, this is something we've never talked about in the Little By podcast, all about fascia release and pain and foam rolling. And so, I want to dive right in and hear who are the main people that come to you for this? What is your patient population?
Well, I work in Colorado in person, and so I have to say we have a very active community here. So the vast majority of the people I work with are your everyday movers, so people that go hiking, they enjoy CrossFit, they go for jogs and things like that. But I do also work with professional athletes as well, insofar as the UFC world, some ultra marathoners, and some alpine skiers. So it's kind of a bit of an eclectic mix.
So, is this something that everybody needs fascia work? Like, this is for anybody that's active, has a body in motion, wants to stay in motion?
Absolutely. Fascia is the most abundant tissue we have in our body, and it is causing issues for most everyone in the world today. So everybody could use a little bit of work here.
So, what are the main symptoms? Like, if someone comes to you, what are some of the common complaints or symptoms you hear?
Well, far and away, the most common is some kind of pain, whether that's chronic pain like low back pain or all over pain, but any type really. It could be pinched nerves, it could be tendonitis, it could be headaches and migraines. It's a wide variety here too, but anything that's restricting your mobility, anything that's creating pain in the body, or if you've experienced a lot of stress throughout your life, any of these things or all of them, some combination of them, can contribute to fascia becoming more unhealthy.
Well, and I think about too, we think about the active person that's working their body, but I also think about the inactive person. Like, I'm thinking about as we're recording this right now, I'm sitting at a desk and I've been working with patients, and I'm like, if you're not mindful, your hamstrings get tight. That starts to pull on your glutes and your low back, right? It's like, so yes, I think everybody needs fascia work, but it's like you're working with the athlete and probably the person that might actually be sitting too long or not moving their body enough. So you don't, it sounds like you don't only run into fascia issues from activity. Like, it can be a number of things that cause.
Absolutely. Honestly, I think inactivity is the most common cause because so few of us are moving the way our bodies were intended to move. And even if you do work out every day, you might spend the rest of your time at a desk or sitting on your couch binge watching Love is Blind or something like I did this weekend. And suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, I've been sitting for hours and hours and hours. And so that's still a lot of time where you're in a more stagnant or static position. And so, even those of us that are pretty active, there's still ways that things start to shrink down and tighten up, even if we're active. So both of those things can matter.
So, and you talked about the fascia being the most abundant tissue in the body. Can you, I define that, describe it a little bit deeper?
Absolutely. So, fascia is the biological fabric that holds everything in our body together. My favorite analogy is that it's like plastic wrap that wraps around every single thing you have. So, every muscle fiber, every muscle group, every bone, organ, ligament, tendon, blood vessel, nerve, lymph node, literally everything we have is wrapped up like a three-dimensional plastic wrap suit that we wear on the inside. So if it were to magically disappear out of your body, you would go tumbling to the ground in a pile of bone fragments and goo. That's how imperative it is for our shape, our structure, and our texture. But it's also what allows our body to glide and move freely. So it has a lot of different roles that it plays in our body, but we tend to get really focused on one symptom or one part of the body when we start feeling pain without realizing this fascial system is one uninterrupted, interconnected system that functions as a unit. So when we can start finding these areas of our fascial system that have become like crumpled up balls of plastic wrap, if you will, those are the areas that end up causing all of these other things. So when we can find those and release those, so many things can be restored because our fascia wraps around everything. It's therefore influencing the position and function of everything.
I love that definition and thinking of the plastic wrap. I can just think about this tightly wound one that I just got. Have you seen those fancy plastic wraps that don't allow any air and that's tightly sealed? I'm like, that's what I want my fascia. I want it really secure. Is there anything as far as lifestyle, diet? Is there anything that you see? Because one of the things that we do in functional medicine is we're always looking at the root cause. And for some people, it might be obvious that it's an over exercise, or maybe it's an under exercise. We talked about being sedentary. But are there any other things, like, do you look at, is there like a chronic inflammatory connection? Is there nutritional involvement in the health of our fascia? What are some of the things that impact it?
Yeah, that's a great question. It, of course, is multifaceted. Our fascia is very sensitive to inflammation. Everybody's a little bit different as far as what things in their diet might be creating more inflammation. We've got the standard ones, usually processed foods, vegetable oils, often dairy, eggs. There's gluten. There's a couple of really high tier things, but it is a little bit different for everyone. If there's one thing I've learned about nutrition, it's that the same thing doesn't work for every single person, right? But stress, I find, is a big component that I'm always asking about and trying to take a deeper dive into. Past injuries are a big one as well. Our fascial system is like a physical log of all of the trauma that we've experienced in our life, whether it be physical trauma or emotional trauma. And so really getting to understand the type of person who I'm working with, it can be really helpful because those things play a big role. Certainly how much someone is moving, but ultimately my biggest thing is fascia, while it is all connected, like I just said, there are certain parts that are more connected than others, and it creates this system of pulleys in the body that, of course, we want to be balanced. And when they're balanced, we can move easily and without pain. But sometimes when we start getting those crumpled up balls of plastic wrap somewhere, it starts throwing off the whole pulley system. And where we end up feeling pain is not where the issue in our fascia lives. So I'd say more than anything else, I'm helping people demystify why their pain is happening, because it's usually somewhere else in the body. And as soon as we release that area and restore balance, then the pain goes away.
And I'm so glad you brought up the stress. I feel like as a practice, that's one thing we're really passionate about right now. And we've talked about this like 100 times on the Low podcast, the vagus nerve and how the vagus nerve impacts our physical health, our mental health, our digestion. Do you know, does the fascia have a number of these nerve endings as well? Does the vagus nerve impact the health of the fascia? Have you seen a connection there?
Absolutely. So our fascial system can actually communicate within itself outside of the nervous system. Of course, they do talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything in the body is talking, but fascia can actually send signals throughout the entirety of that system faster than nerves. So a nerve signal goes at about 150 miles an hour. Fascia is sending signals within itself upwards of 700, 750 miles an hour. So it's
Wow.
happening very, very quickly. There's a lot of free nerve endings in our fascia, but there's also a lot of proprioceptors, which are little receptors that are 24/7 taking in a constant data feedback situation. It's just a constant feedback loop of where our body is in space, how we're moving through the world. It's anything really that it's interpreting in our outside external world around us and our internal world. So fascia is going to respond to anything that stimulates it. So if it's an internal threat like anxiety, PTSD, chronic stress, things like that, fascia will actually contract separate from muscle fibers, trying to essentially brace for an impact that may never come. So it is important to understand the physical toll that stress can have on fascia. In fact, it can even thicken over time, which, as you can imagine, makes everything a little bit more sluggish, right? It's harder for our blood to flow. It's harder for our lymphatic system to carry out toxins. It's harder for our muscles and joints to move freely. So it absolutely has a big impact.
Well, and you talked about some areas that the fascia either gather more problemsome areas. Where are those in the body?
Well, it depends on a couple of things. So first and foremost, I would say, um, first and foremost, sorry, I was like, hold on.
There's a
My
dog.
dogs are freaking out. This is what we do every day when the Amazon person comes by, or someone is encroaching on their kingdom.
My dog too. I have a Weimaraner, so it's the exact same thing.
Oh my gosh. So the first thing I would say is there's a very common pattern of opposites in the body. So if you have a lot of tension and pain in the back of your neck or your upper back, it's normally coming from your chest in the front part of your neck. Or if you're experiencing a lot of low back pain, the number one cause of low back pain is tension in the quads and hip flexors and even in the core. So a lot of times it's on the opposite side of where you're feeling pain. That happens quite a bit. But it could also depend on your specific patterns. Are there movements that you're doing consistently over and over again? You know, with athletes, it's easy to know, right? They're swinging a golf club hundreds of times a week, or they're swinging a baseball bat and doing that same repetition over and over again. But maybe your repetition is that you go to CrossFit 5 days a week and you're doing what turns out to be 200 squats every week, or you're spending a lot of time at your desk in a specific position. And so in that case, I would say you want to go for the spots that tend to tighten up for you based on your own personal habits. So me, for example, when I'm working on people in my office in Colorado, I spend a lot of my day looking down as I work on people. And so I have to counteract that very regularly by working on my neck, because that's my pattern, right? That's
Yes.
the same position I'm in over and over. So I'll spend more time trying to undo things that I can't avoid doing for the time being.
So, do most people come to you with a specific complaint that you're evaluating, or do you do like total body movement assessments? Do you feel their fascia? Can you tell where some areas are imbalanced? Like, if I'm a patient of yours, what does that look like?
Most people come in for a specific ailment, but there's really no way for me to really assess it without looking at the whole body. How is the entire body moving together? So whether they want to or not, I'm looking at the whole body, but that it really shows a lot. The way we move, the way we hold our posture, it gives a lot of insight to these lines of fascia that might be more tight. So I tend to work on a lot of areas that people think are unrelated, and then they think I'm some kind of a wizard, but it's really just following these lines of pull in the body.
I love that. So, someone comes into you with an element, you assess them, you kind of figure out, do you give them exercises to do at home? Are you using different strategies like foam rolling, the grid, cupping, dry needling, or does it really just vary depending on the person?
So what I've learned over the years, from my own experience with this work and, over the last 11-ish years working with hundreds and hundreds of patients, is that we need to come at fascia in a very specific way. And the way I found that it changes most quickly and lasts the longest is by compressing areas that are tight and then showing someone how to actively move their own body while that spot is compressed. That seems to really quickly interrupt poor movement patterns, restore space in tissue, and rehydrate it without needing to spend so long on one area. So when I'm in my office, I am actually compressing areas of fascia with my foot. My clients lovingly refer to it as being stepped on, but it is more strategic than that. But then I also teach people how to do the same thing for themselves with foam rollers and lacrosse balls or something similar, tools that are readily available at your gym, or you probably already own them. You just don't really know how to use them. So I do a lot of virtual helping people as well, from all across the globe, truly, for all kinds of various things, because we can work on our fascia on our own. We really don't need someone else to do it for us. In fact, it can be more powerful when we do it ourselves, because our brain can sense that, oh, it's safe to access this range of motion again. I'm actually doing the motion myself, and it changes things. Most treatments out there are very passive, where we lay there and have someone else attempt to change our body for us. And while this certainly can work, what I've seen is it works so much faster when you yourself are involved, which I think we can say is true for any aspect of wellness. When you are a willing and active participant in your own healing journey, things go faster.
Well, and I'm sure just the awareness around like listening to your own body and learning to feel things and what those messages are telling you. Because I think that's something that we see a lot in functional medicine when I ask patients, like, oh, I don't really know how my energy is, or, oh, I don't really know if my skin's dry. Like there's this lack of awareness on how we really feel each day and how our system is working. So I imagine you see that a lot. Like, I think about when is the last time I evaluated my fascia? Like probably never. I'm just like, hey, do I need a foam roll right here? I could be a lot more intentional with this. So you're giving me a message too. So getting into the specifics of the foam roller, does it need to be? I know a lot of my patients ask me like the grid that's like a textured foam roller versus a regular foam roller that's smooth. When you're talking about like the most impact of compressing that fascia that you were describing, does it really matter? Does it need to be a textured foam roller? Can it be a regular one? You mentioned lacrosse balls. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I actually really love the standard smooth high density roller because it's able to grab so much tissue at one time. And we're able to move through a range of motion without the level of intensity you would likely get when there's all of those big bumps and knobs. That's a recipe for possibly bruising or having it be really intense. And I do teach foam rolling very different from the average person. There's little to no actual rolling. It's all about that compression and active movement thing, since that works so well. But when you start doing it that specific way, it tends to be a bit more intense than your regular foam roller session. And while we do want to continue to release fascia this way and find those spots that are tender and sore, because that's fascia's way of saying, help me, we also don't want the intensity to be higher than about a 7 out of 10 on whatever your subjective scale is. Otherwise, your nervous system is going to start to protest and your body might fight back a little bit. You're not going to get the same results as when you're just in a bit more of a calm state. So that's another reason to not use something with a bunch of those bumps and knobs, just so that it's not quite so intense when you're trying to get your fascia to work with you and change with you.
Is there any recommended time? Like if you're going to work on, let's say your hamstring or quad, do you want to foam roll every day or should you add some recovery time in? Like, is there a specific length that you recommend with it being more of that compression than it is the actual rolling? Do you have like a prescription you give people? And I know there's a lot of variation, I'm sure.
There's definitely some variation. I normally recommend whatever spot you're compressing and moving around on, I'm compressing it at most 90 seconds. And that's really more at a expert level when you're really used to the sensation. 30 to 60 seconds can be plenty of time when you're just starting out. And because you're doing that movement and changing things faster, you really don't need to spend a full 10 minutes on your quads. That's probably more than you need, which is great. That means you can get better results in less time.
Yes.
For sure.
And so if people are new to foam rolling and they're really interested in this, is there any resources that you have or places you recommend looking at that are good exercises or placement?
Yeah, so I'm the most active on Instagram. My handle is at Movement by Julia, and I have a lot of sample foam rolling videos that you can find just for free on there. I also have a full online library that's part of just my business practice to help people from afar, and they can just dive into it on their own and learn how to release really anything from head to toe. Because like you said, we may have no idea what the texture of our fascia or the texture of our body really feels like. Most times fascia tightens very slowly over time, unless you've had something like a car accident or some type of a traumatic injury. Most times it's changing really slow. And so we don't necessarily feel that fascia has become tight, but maybe we realize, oh man, I feel really heavy and dense. And every time I go work out, I'm really sore afterwards and it takes days to recover, or you just feel like you're more limited in the things you're able to do. And you keep adding things to the list of like, oh, well, my body doesn't like to squat anymore. It doesn't like to jog anymore. These are all signs that your fascia is tight and it happens so slowly, you probably didn't realize that it's been sneaking up on you.
So it sounds like first, like awareness of how your body's feeling,
Mhm.
awareness of movement patterns throughout the day, the week. If you have anything that you're doing over and over again, thinking of that contrast, that pulley system to keep your body in balance. So, like for me, I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. I'm holding them all the time. That's a lot of bicep, right? Like I probably need
Yep.
to be doing some extension and tricep to keep that, like even on a very small scale. I think about a lot of our moms. We work with a lot of women, and I talk about how fitness as a mom can be very functional in nature, right? You're doing farm carries, holding a car seat, right? Like picking a
Mhm.
baby up from a crib. So it sounds like you need to have awareness of movement patterns, how you feel throughout the day. Nutrition and the way we eat can help reduce inflammation. The way we're managing stress, evaluating that, using a foam roller, just a basic foam roller, helping with compression. You gave us some good tools that we can see on your Instagram website. Is there anything else in the fascia space that you want to share? Because I want to also get into like some of the things that you practically do in your lifestyle, but I wanted to make sure we covered what we needed to around the fascia and kind of chronic pain space.
Sure. The last thing I would mention is really any type of movement is really helpful for our fascial tissue. So, one of its many roles is to be essentially a water irrigation system to the rest of our body. And those little droplets of water traveling through the fibers of our fascia only get places where it needs to go with movement. So, foam rolling and doing it the way we've been talking about will absolutely get hydration to the right places. But if you don't have a foam roller handy or you need to just do something for your day, any type of movement where you're rocking your head side to side, you're twisting your rib cage side to side, you're reaching your arms up, you're squatting down, just some type of dynamic. It doesn't have to be intense, but some type of movement where you're wringing out your body and getting hydration everywhere. That's still really helpful for your fascia.
I keep thinking about Spider-Man and his like net.
Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm just like imagining spraying and slide and swinging around. Like I just imagine that as like the fascia that's holding our body together. I love thinking about it as an irrigation system. Like I've never thought about that before, like helping to hydrate and have our body move in the way that it should. I love that. So this is all very, very helpful. And I know people are going to look at your videos and because foam rollers, what do they cost? Like $20. Like this is a
Oh, yeah.
very easy tool to bring in to your general movement wellness. So now I kind of want to hear like, I'm always interested as a healthcare provider, talking to other healthcare providers is like, what are some of the things that you do, like exercise wise, nutrition wise? I know we're very individualized, but I know people will get some takeaways when you share some of the things that have worked for you. So kind of tell me like, what are things that you feel like have the biggest impact on how you feel from day to day?
Mm. Well, there are a couple things. I truly do a little bit of fascia release every day. And that normally, as we talked about earlier, I do a lot of work around my neck just because I know my own patterns. But I will hop on the foam roller for just 10, 15 minutes or so in the evening when I'm watching TV because my foam roller is right on my floor. It's so easy to just grab it and do a couple of things. It doesn't always have to be a separate part of your day. If your camera's off on your Zoom meeting, you can grab your roller and just start doing a couple things while you're doing something else, right? But I do eat a lot of produce, trying to keep everything super hydrated. I'm trying to eat my water whenever I can. We also have a very specialized type of water in our fascial system. It's structured water, which means it's kind of between a solid and a liquid. It's almost like a runny egg white type of
Mm.
consistency, and it's filled with nutrients. And unlike regular water that has a neutral charge, this water in our fascia actually has a negative charge. So when we go out into sunlight and get the right red light and UV rays from the sun, it essentially can charge the water in our fascia like a battery. So I really aim to get at least 15 minutes of direct sunlight whenever possible. If it's snowing, rainy, or cloudy, I also own a little red light that I will lay under to help just keep my energy up overall, which is still working with the fascial system. And I certainly go on walks. I have two dogs. They are the most high energy lunatics you've ever seen, and they must be walked for at least 45 minutes, if not much longer, every day. So I do a lot of walking and hiking and then strength training a few times a week as well.
So I was thinking as you were talking about the consistency of the hydration with the fascia, do you feel like this has anything to do with why we become more inflamed with acidic versus alkaline health environments? Because that's one of the things that we talk about a lot is how the more produce we eat, the more alkaline we make our body, the typical like inflammation doesn't thrive as much as processed food, sugar. I think there are some of these big picture things that no matter who you are is important, right? We can't like live on processed food and sugar all day long and have a very acidic environment and expect our body to work the way it was designed to. But do you think that has anything to do with the inflammation or like what nutrients? You kind of talked about like it being a very nutritionally dense hydration.
Yeah, I mean, that same type of structured water we have in our fascia is in fruits and vegetables. So eating more of those sort of help our body recognize, oh, here's more of this type of water that we really need, and we can use all of the nutrients here. Our fascia is what actually carries all of the nutrition we need to us on a cellular level. So helping ingest more of that structured water and more water in general, that's not just simply going to go straight through your system is important. So we've all heard the person, or maybe it's you listening, that you think, I just need to drink more water. That's the classic thing we all say, right? But drinking an extra Nalgene a day, if you're sitting most of your day, doesn't actually help you. You're really just giving yourself a recipe for being in the bathroom every 30 minutes because there's nowhere for that water to go. We have to move our body or release our fascia in order to get that water out into all the areas that need it so that our body can really use it. So eating more of your water through produce or moving your body a little bit more or releasing your fascia are great ways to keep you much more hydrated than simply downing an extra water bottle or two per day.
That is just so fascinating. I feel like the more we learn about how the body works, the cooler, and it gives you more of a why. Like, why eat produce? We talk a lot about that study that was done that if you want the longest life, when it comes to longevity, 30 different plant-based foods a week, right? And it's like, even thinking on the fascia level, how that hydration from those fruits and vegetables, I've never connected that at all. So I think that's just another reason for what we talk about of eating more plants right here. Like, I love that. And then the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking, it's really interesting you brought up the sunlight because some of my listeners know, but I've gotten into gardening recently. And I feel like I'm like so many of my patients when it comes to health, like when I get this perfect backyard with these garden beds, I'm going to start gardening. And I was like, no, why not just like put some pots and start gardening? But it's really interesting that like plants need sunlight to grow, right? Like you cannot take a seedling and stick it in the shade and expect that thing to grow. And it's just like you think about like, I don't know where I didn't think about the intricacy. Obviously, I love being outside. I'm outside all the time. I like my girls to be outside barefoot, but I'm like, we cannot thrive as humans, as plants, as any like microorganism without sunlight. And it just like, as I've watched my garden, it's become more clear the right hydration, the right soil, like the nutrients we give our plants, the same way we give nutrients to our body impact our survival rate. Like, I think it's like so interesting to compare us to plants. Like there's hydration, sunlight, mineral balance, right? Like all living
Absolutely.
beings.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a great analogy where, we've gotten such amazing technology things at our disposal, and we've made the world very convenient at times, and yet our world has only gotten sicker. And so looking to these things that are already in nature is like, oh, of course we need these things. We're making it really complicated, but yeah, we need the right type of water. We need sunlight. We need good nutritional food. It can be less complicated than we make it out to be.
For sure. It's wild. So tell me a little, you mentioned some of the exercises that you do and the eating a lot of plants and described why that hydration looks different, which is great. Is there any strategies, and those might be it, but is there any other strategies that have helped with stress management? Obviously, you work with like, I'm sure, very different clients. You're working one-on-one with people. Have you found any, like whether it's deep breathing, it's meditation, it's a book you've read, like I feel like stress is a common thing that comes up. And I just can tell you how many patients, we're a cash pay practice. And so people come in and spend cash. Most of them are eating a lot of whole foods, right? They're
Mhm.
prioritizing sleep. They're really trying to get good hydration and movement and strength training and walking. But yet they still have all of these different elements. And when you talk with them, like one of the big areas that I feel like is the hardest for people to figure out is stress management, right? And what does that mean? It's so subjective. So I just love when people are open to sharing, like, what is the most effective for you in managing stress? And maybe it is these things you mentioned, like sunlight and walks, but is there anything else in the stress space that you found very helpful?
Well, I will say that fascia release can be such an incredible stress management tactic. I believe often the fastest way to the brain is through the body. We don't always have to name everything we're feeling or even talk about what we're feeling, but we do have to reconnect with our body. And so if you can grab your roller and find a spot and just slowly and intentionally move your body with deep breathing, so that nice, deep diaphragmatic breathing, I feel like a new person even after just 10 minutes of slowly moving. I get very grounded in my body. I'm breathing really deeply. And so I'm getting all of these benefits simultaneously. I'm reducing stress and creating more hydration and space in my fascia and preventing future injuries. It's this really cool combination that I'm doing all of those things with the same moves.
I have a patient that she does some very deep tissue massage, which is, I'm sure, fascia release, just with a masseuse. And she gets emotional release. She'll talk to me about like every time she goes in, she'll just start bawling when they hit a certain area of her body. And
Mhm.
I just think that's really interesting. Maybe I'm very disconnected. I haven't ever experienced that, but I'm like, that is a very, like you could probably tap through some of the motions through the body, as you mentioned, which is really interesting. Have you ever had anybody have that emotional release through one of your sessions?
Oh, absolutely. I have a box of tissue that lives in my office because it's not, a daily occurrence with clients, but it does happen a lot. One of my mentors used to say that fascia is like the paper that your life story is written on. Because of all of those nerve endings and proprioceptors, every thought, feeling, emotion, experience, and trauma you've ever had has been logged by your fascial system and has passed through it. So as fascia gets tighter, energy can get stored and trapped in certain areas of the body. And it really, truly could be anywhere. I've heard so many people say, oh, trauma is stored in the hips, but I've seen people burst into tears, releasing their rib cage, releasing their neck. I myself have had many powerful emotional releases that um, were along a scar that I got from birth. There's all different areas that the body can store things. And it's it's not right or wrong. Some people have them, some people don't. It's just a way to release energy from the body.
Well, it's what the whole book is about. Your body keeps score. I'm sure you've heard of that, and many of the people listening have. This is all really helpful. Is there any like simple takeaway that you have not covered yet, or that you just want to reiterate, kind of in line with our slogan that little by little, little becomes a lot? Is there anything outside of what we've talked about, or reframing one of the things that's like, hey, if you listeners can do this one thing, it's going to make a huge difference in your fascia, your health, anything that you want to share?
Well, let me break down a little bit more of what I mean when we talk about compression and active movement. So, if you are laying on your thighs on a foam roller in that quad area, most of us think that if we move, kind of pull ourselves with our arms and we'll roll back and forth up and down with the quad, right? So instead of doing that, get in the same position, but find one spot on that thigh that feels a little tender or sore, and then stay there. Let your body sink into it, and then slowly bend your heels back. So you'll bend from the knees, bend your heels back, kind of like a hamstring curl, and straighten back out. And do that really slowly a few times while you're breathing. You can even stay in that bent position and then rock your heels side to side to go across the fibers of the quad muscle. Do that a couple times and then come off. So I just want to make sure people understand it doesn't have to be complicated. We're not doing some crazy dynamic movement while you're compressing a spot. It's just stop the rolling, stay on one spot, and any nearby joint or limb see if you can slowly move it around and see how you feel after. There's such a difference between sort of the mindless rolling where you're only getting those superficial layers of tissue and that deep, really slow, intentional movement when you do those two things together.
I love that. And so, in a healthy, like, I just want to make sure if we think about the quad for a second when you're on top of it, if the fascia is in a healthy state and you roll over it, should it be a little bit tender at all, or should it not? And you're looking for a spot that feels a little bit more tender, and that's where you're sitting in. Is that
Yeah, anytime we compress the body, there's going to be sensation to it, right? But healthy fascia, if I'm going to throw one last analogy at you, is kind of like a wet sponge that encases everything in our body when it's healthy. So with a wet sponge, you can twist it and move in any direction, and it's very easy and it's not a big deal, right? But when there's an area that's more like a dry sponge, that's much different. It's more brittle, it's hard to twist it. So we're looking for those areas that are more like a dry sponge, and those usually hurt more when they're being compressed because there's not that fluid and hydration in there. So I would go along, you could roll on your quad for a moment just to find which spot feels like it's the most tender because we all have a couple spots that you're like, ooh, this one
yes?
over everything else that we're feeling. But I will say that you'll find the more consistent you are, you're going to have less and less of those spots, and it's going to feel more like an enjoyable stretch experience as opposed to, we don't always need to be hunting down some really intense spot and trying to beat our body into submission. Just see what's there and work on the areas that are clearly calling your name through that sensation.
This is so great. And I'm just thinking of plastic wrap still all balled up. Like, I'm like, okay, I got to go find my balled up plastic wrap. I love the analogies. This was
Yeah.
really great, Julie. I really appreciate you being on here. I'm going to put your information in the show notes. So you guys make sure to check her out. Go to her Instagram, go to her website. I know I'm going to look for exercises for my traps. That's where I like to hold my tension, is in my traps. So I will be logging on to your stuff. But thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Let me see if I can. It should stop.
Check how you